So welcome to the third of the lectures on Plato's Republic that the Center for Philosophical Research of the Academy of Athens is sponsoring this year with Jessica Moss, whom I'm absolutely delighted to introduce to you. Jessica and I worked closely together when she was a graduate student at Princeton. In fact, one of the best things I did as a professor at Princeton was do a reading course on the Gorgias together, which I will never forget. And that's how I started thinking that themos becomes necessary for Plato, that he hasn't quite got it yet, but just about ready to get it. Jessica has been associated with a number of distinguished universities: Yale, Princeton, Pittsburgh, Oxford, and NYU. That's a record that's not easy to beat.
They say hard to hear. Oh, we'll give you this. He was crazy.
Sorry, here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I have a little paper here, mostly because her titles are very long. So her first book, which she published after she received her PhD in 2004, is on Aristotle, on the apparent good, perception, fantasia, thought, and desire. Oxford Press, 2021. 21? No, 12. That was my dyslexic part. But she saw the light and came back to Plato. And her last book doesn't have a long title. It's called Plato's Epistemology, Being and Seeming. It's a wonderful book, and I really do urge you to take a look at it. It's almost completely correct. A prolific writer. Apart from the two books, she's published already 18 papers, and she has 5 forthcoming papers, which I think is really not really nice for the rest of us. But in any case, her title today, which is also long, is, sorry, I have to read it just to make sure. Why is doxa set over nomima at Republic 479d? A new interpretation of opinion and its objects. And from having seen the abstract, I can't wait. So Jessica, welcome to Athens once again. It's wonderful to have you here. Delighted to have the opportunity to hear you.
Good. Is this on? Can you hear me? You people on Zoom? Someone on Zoom, put up your thumb if you can hear me.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Whitney.
And somebody shout if they can't hear me anymore. So first of all, just that.
We can't hear you on Zoom.
Hello? How's that? That's good. Okay, I was praising Alexander and thanking him very much for inviting me. And now I will cut to the chase. Can you hear me if I put you on the microphone? Can you hear me like this? You Zoom people? Yes, good. Okay, I'm going to go. Okay, I do have a long title and I have a ridiculously long handout. And I have a lot to get through, so I'm going to try my best. So I'm just starting with a puzzle, and this paper grew up for me from really just being puzzled by something in Plato rather than feeling like I had an answer. I will say, non-dogmatically, I think I've uncovered something interesting. I'm not sure that I really entirely believe that it all hangs together, but I'm interested in what I found, and I'm interested to share it with you and have your reactions to it. So the puzzle is that something goes wrong in the middle of the famous argument in Book 5 against the sight lovers. And what I've done here is I've given you a 5-premise argument and some texts to support it, and I assume it's pretty familiar to everybody, and I'll go through it fairly quickly. But there's this argument that the sight lovers don't have episteme, they only have doxa. That's the argument I have in mind. We've heard 2 great papers on it already. So premise 1 is that the sight lovers recognize, and I'll come back to this word a lot, nomizein, and embrace various things that are beautiful. And the things that he mentions, that Socrates mentions here, are physical, perceptible objects, beautiful colors, shapes, and everything fashioned out of them, they don't recognize the form of beauty. So I've underlined things that seem to be co-referring. That is, it seems like the parts I've underlined are all supposed to refer to the same things. The sight lovers recognize, he later says, beautiful things, nomizein kala pragmata, but not the form. And then later he says they recognize the many beautifuls. So very natural to take all those phrases as just mere variations, paraphrases of each other. Premise 2, famous complicated stuff that Leslie spoke about a lot, and Alexander, and I won't speak about today, but episteme is set over what holy is, agnosia, ignorance, is set over what in no way is, doxa is between these two, and so is set over something that's between being and not being. So that's the setup for the argument. Now we're looking for something that's between being and not being, and we'll know that that thing is the object of doxa. And if the sight lovers attend to that kind of thing, they have doxa. So we're looking for something to be between being and not being, and he gets there in a few sort of mysterious steps. So the first step is that the many beautifuls, justs, piouses, etc., always also appear opposite. So to abbreviate, the many Fs also appear not F, and then the controversial conclusion, so they are no more F than not F. I won't read through the text there. It's a long and important text, and we'll come back to it at some point, but he does move from the fact that each of these things appears opposite ways to the fact that it is opposite ways. What I want to emphasize for today is that the many beautifuls here have to be things that can appear both beautiful and ugly. And if we've been reading through the argument, it's natural to go back to premise 1 from 476b and say, oh yeah, things like beautiful colors and shapes and physical objects that are made out of them. So beautiful sunsets or beautiful dogs or whatever you might have. Okay, so premise 4, the crucial claim, so the many Fs are between being and not being. And again, he refers to these as in this text I have here, he doesn't actually have any term for them. I shouldn't have underlined the many Fs, but we know he's referring back to what came just before, the many beautifuls, etc. So what we're expecting right now is for him to say, okay, so the many beautifuls and the many justs and so on are between being and not being. But that's not exactly what he says. He says something surprising and different. In premise 5, he says, since, I'll read the Greek, ta ton polon pola nomima, kalu teperi kaiton alon. Or as I abbreviated the translation, since the manys, hoi polloi, the many peoples, many nomima, I'll come back to that word, about the beautiful and all the other things are between being and not being, those things are the objects of doxa. So you might think, oh, okay, we've just changed topics. We were talking about beautiful colors and things made of them, and now we're talking about something else called nomima. I'll come back to this word. But if he were changing the topic, then the argument would be a disaster, because now he's reached his conclusion. The sight lovers, therefore, have only, and we have an ara right there in text 4, he's concluding from what he's just said, they have only doxa, and it's going to be the philosophers studying the forms have episteme. And when he does this, he refers to the sight lovers as tous pola kala theomenus. So those who are observing or studying the many beautiful things. And he mentions the many justs and so on. Okay, so what I think has happened in this argument is that all the phrases I've underlined really should refer to the same thing. Those things are the doxasta, the objects of doxa, and it's because the sight lovers attend to those things that the sight lovers have doxa. Okay, what are those things? Well, back from the very beginning, beautiful sight, colors and shapes and things like that, things made out of them. So what is this word nomima doing at this crucial moment in text 3, which makes up premise 5? Why do we have ta nomima here instead of the many Fs? As I said in the handout, I'm near the bottom of page 2 now. For the argument to be valid, the many nomima must be another phrase, another name for the many Fs, which must be the name for the doxasta. But aren't the many Fs perceptible objects? That's what it seemed like it was at the beginning of this argument with colors and sounds. That's what it's going to be on the divided line. Doxasta are shadows and images, reflections, and the things that cast them. So physical things like people and dogs and so on. And there's also, it's worth noting, I won't read it out now, but text 5 from the Phaedo, very similar language to what we get here and a very similar theory. Of course, it's a different dialogue, maybe he changed, but here we have beautiful things such as, so tapola kala here is hoian anthropon, a hippon, a himation, things like that. People, horses, cloaks, etc. And there he's going to say very similar things about those. They always change by contrast with the form as what he here in Republic 5 says. Okay, so very strong presupposition in favor of the following thesis. When he says ta nomima in text 3, that's just another word for beautiful objects, physical things, shapes and sounds and so on. But that's a little bit surprising. Nomima is not a very familiar word, and people haven't taken the argument that way. So there's a puzzle. Why does he say ta nomima here instead of just kala pragmata or people and horses or whatever? Here are a few proposals, either that people have explicitly addressed this question or they've just written a translation that writes it in. People often translate nomima in text 3 as beliefs. So for example, that's Shore's translation. Cornford, I think, has opinion. Gail Fine in her articles has some explicit discussion of it. And many, many other people have something like nomima, like beliefs. Gail has very good citations for that. So that's an interesting interpretation. I have two worries about it. One is kind of more theoretical and the other is more specific. The first is that it seems to mix up, it saddles Plato with a conflation between what I'm calling the mind and the world sides of things, right? We've got knowledge and doxa and ignorance over here, and then over here we have ta'on and tomeon, and then we should have some non-mind stuff in between. We shouldn't have some mindy stuff. We shouldn't have beliefs over here. Now, maybe that's not a decisive objection, and there are some really interesting interpretations on which doxa is set over other people's opinions. I gave one citation in the kind of representative citation in the footnote from Malcolm, that he thinks in the cave, the shadows don't represent physical objects, they represent other people's beliefs. So, okay, maybe that's an interesting way to go. There's doubts about it, but we could be open to it. The most decisive objection I think I didn't put on there, which is that it makes the argument invalid. So I think I've already said that. He would just be changing topics suddenly, right? How can you just move from beliefs then back to the beautiful things? At the very least, we're missing a bunch of premises to connect them. But then here's another very kind of concrete objection. This is not how nomimon is used anywhere else that I can find. So I have not done an exhaustive study of all of Greek, but I cannot find anywhere that Plato uses it like this, and I can't find anyone else doing it. And if you look in the lexica, you get things like conformable to custom, usage, or law, observant of law, usages, or then a new nomima can be usages or customs. So I'm citing two lexica there, and I mostly agree. I'll add something, but not beliefs below. Okay, so then here's another interpretation that's out there that does fit better with the way that Plato and others use the word nomimon, conventions in the sense of rules or principles. So I'm establishing a convention, I say everybody on the left side of the room has to speak English and on the right have to speak Greek or something, that kind of thing where I lay down a rule. And they say, well, maybe that's what this is doing. The many have these rules that they've laid down, or maybe rules that they follow. So I gave example from Adam there. For example, the pleasant is kalon, or the advantageous is kalon, things like that. And he does a nice, I like this bit of Adam, he tries to show there are things that could conflict with each other. But are they things that could appear big and small? So if you look back to, where do we get the bigs and the smalls and things like that for my text? I'm not in control of my own handout because it's so long, text 1, right? We had the beautiful and the ugly and the just will appear unjust, and the doubles will appear half and the bigs will appear small, and so on and so on. So it's just, I don't think conventions in the sense of rules or principles is going to do the job there. Okay, so back on page 3 of my handout, it makes premise, how could these things appear F and not F? That's one problem. And the other problem is it just makes premise 5, as does the beliefs interpretation, just appear, it sort of came out of nowhere. it hung out for a moment and then went away again, and now he's talking again about beautiful shapes and things like that. Okay, so I don't think that either of these will do, in the sense that they're uncharitable to Plato's argument. They make it a worse argument than we hope that it is. So here's another interpretation, and I have found this in 2 footnotes in 2 different articles. So please definitely tell me if it's elsewhere out there. But I found one is from this really interesting paper by Michael Ayres and Maria Rosa Antognazza. They talk about Plato and others, and they have a footnote and they're picking up on something that I didn't give it a text number, but if you look back under premise 1 on your first page, I mentioned nomizein, which he says in several different places, right? The sight lovers nomizein, the many beautifuls. And their thought is, aha, the nomima are the things that they nomizusin, the things that they nomizein. And that is a grammatically very solid interpretation. So nomima, this is Ayres and Antognazza, commonly meant conventions, i.e. things that exist by convention. So not the conventions in the sense of the rules somebody makes, but rather the things that are brought into being by those rules or that exist according to those rules. So if I say, let's all have a convention that there's an invisible line down the room that separates the Greek speakers from the English speaker, that line is a nomimon. It's something that I brought into existence through my convention. I think that's what they have in mind, and is perhaps preferred here to doxasta. I'll just skip to the chase. They're postulated states of affairs, constructs of the mind. In this case, moreover, the minds of the many. Okay, I don't think this is right, but I think it's interesting, and I think grammatically it's doing a better job. I think it's a bit out of nowhere, these postulated states of affairs, but maybe there's something to it. We can come back. And then a similar kind of view from Xanthippe, another footnote. The nomima are the things acknowledged by them. So here they're not constructs of the mind, but just, so I'll come back to this, but a very standard use of nomizein, when Plato says that the many nomizein, the many beautifuls, but not the form itself. That's like saying Socrates doesn't nomizein the gods of Athens, but other gods. So recognize as existing. So here it could be, we all recognize that we exist, but we don't believe in fairies, so we thereby become nomima, or nomimoi, things that are recognized to exist. Okay. So I'm moving on to my proposal now. I think that both Xanthippe and Ayres and Antognazza are on the right track, but I want to make some revisions here. My proposal is that nomimos, when it shows up here in this argument, means things that are conventionally deemed F, where F could be beautiful, big, pious, whatever, or conventionally recognized. I forgot to put it on here. I have it later. Another one is conventionally honored. The way that gods could be honored. We'll come back to that, but mostly these 2. Okay, so my thought is that proposal C, that we just discussed, conventionally recognized things, is on the right track, but it needs revision. First, looking at the ways that Plato uses nomimos, we need to emphasize the role of nomos. So you could say a nomimon is just something someone nomize, something someone recognizes, but the way Plato's going to use it, and others also, the notion that they're acting in accordance with a nomos is going to be very important. And then contra both of those readings under C, take the predicative reading of nomizein in addition to the existential reading. I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'll talk more about those readings, but I'll just explain it here. Not just things that exist by convention or that are conventionally recognized to exist, but things that are conventionally recognized as being beautiful or being big or being ugly, and so on and so on. So I think that that's what the nomima are going to be. And I want to address a worry that I feel like is, in some moods, I feel like is fatal to the whole project. And in other moods, I think, it's a problem, but it's not the worst problem. I'll just be honest with you. It's a big worry. The worry is the word peri. So if you look back at text 3, T3, that phrase I've underlined, this troublesome phrase, is tato polon pola nomima, and then he doesn't say kala nomima, he says kalu te peri, so about the beautiful and the other things. And I think that peri there really explains why people have gone for translations like beliefs or conventions, right? Beliefs and conventions can be about beautiful things. things that are recognized to be beautiful, the way that I want to go, those aren't things that are about beautiful things, right? So I do think that this is a problem. Xanthippe has a nice suggestion, so I'm quoting it from the same footnote. He says, in this case, the peri after nomima, so I'm back on page 3 under worry. The peri after nomima does not mean about so as to point to an object of reference of a belief, but more vaguely indicates the respect. In respect of beauty, they acknowledge nothing else than the many instances of beauty, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I hope that Xanthippe is right, that this is acceptable. I'm very eager to hear people's thoughts about this. I will say, when I've looked for the phrase ta nomima peri something, or looked for these words together, it does seem to mean what Adam wants it to mean, conventions about what reading B had it, conventions about something. So for example, from the laws, the practice or custom concerned with drinking, not the practice that is itself drinking, but maybe that's not such a big difference. So here's my kind of methodological claim. I am saddling Plato with some sloppiness here. The reading that I'm going to attribute to Plato, it would have been better for him not to say peri in the genitive, and that's exactly what he did. So isn't that uncharitable to Plato? My defense is I think I'm being more charitable to him than other readings, because on my reading, the argument against the sight lovers, such an important argument to him, is a valid argument, right? He's talking about the same objects all along that are the doxasta, rather than switching topics and having a crucial premise be about something else. Okay, and my second defense, and this is important, I think I'm fairly convinced by this one. So think of the English word convention. I could say, I made a convention, or well, let's all come up with a convention. And in that case, rule or practice is pretty good. Rule or custom, no, just rule. Principle, maybe. Rule or principle is pretty good. That's something that I made. But then I can also say, I've noticed that in Greece, there's a custom of lovely things that Greek people do. I won't think of an example. But there, I don't mean that there's a rule or principle. I've just noticed that there's a practice, and practice would be a perfectly good synonym for it. I have noticed in the Cratylus, which I have absolutely no quotations from on this handout, but is very relevant, what starts off being nomos, he later refers to as ethos. So maybe there's some, nomos can mean custom as well as convention. So the thought is that nomos is ambiguous between those, so maybe nomimon is ambiguous between those two. Often it's indeterminate which is which, and so it's understandable if Plato slides a bit. In the footnote, I won't read it out, but we have a place where I think dogma slides in the same way. Either it's something that's in people's heads, or it's the object of those things, something out in the world, some practices. Okay, so that's my acknowledgement that I'm attributing some sloppiness to Plato, but my defense in saying it's not such bad sloppiness. Okay, now moving on. I want to give you my positive account of what nomimon means. I said it's not belief, and in this case, it's not conventions in the sense of principles or rules. So how does Plato and how do other people use this word nomimos? It basically is an adjective that means nomos conforming or nomos sanctioned, where nomos can mean law or it can just mean custom. And it's most often or very often paired with just. Ta dikaia kai ta nomima is a very standard phrase, so something like law-abiding or lawful. And as I said in arguing against Xanthippe, there's often a very live association with nomos. So it's not just etymological, it's a kind of a living derivation. The nomimon very often is what the nomos commands, or when it's more closely tied to nomizein, which is not often, I'll come back to it, but what people nomize because it's dictated by a nomos, or what people nomize and in so doing establish a nomos. So my claim is usually when you see Plato using the word nomimon, there's not far to look for a nomos, either the actual word nomos or a reference to something that is a nomos. Okay, and I'm not going to go through all these quotations, but one that's particularly relevant, text 6, it's the very same phrase that we see in the sight lover's argument, ta ton polon nomima, the nomima of the many. And here it means things established by laws, things established by customs. Okay. And there's other passages there. Okay, so it's an adjective, and like other adjectives, it can be used as a substantive. And there it can mean either nomos conforming things like practices or even objects that conform to the laws, or it can mean rules where it's more or less synonymous with nomoi. And again, compare the ambiguity of convention, things you make versus things you do. And a passage that's really helpful for me, text 8 from earlier in the Republic, we're talking about the nomima that the citizens of the Kallipolis will kind of discover on their own because they're imbued with eunomia. And the things that he mentions, the nomima, are not things like rules. They are things, I've underlined them in the English: silence, giving place, service, haircuts, garments, sandals, footwear. So all those things are nomima in the sense that they're things that are in accordance with the law or in accordance with what's sanctioned. Here, not explicit nomos, but rather the kind of inner sense of nomos that the people have. Okay. And yeah, text 9, I won't read it out, but it's important, similarly to the sight lovers, because here we have fine and shameful nomima, tamen kala, and tamen aiskra nomima. That's what I wish he had said in the sight lovers argument rather than the peri. But here they could be conventions in the sense of rules, or they could be practices. But they're clearly ones that society has, in the good city at least, has rightly deemed fine or shameful. Okay, so my claim is that nomima are things that are established by a nomos. Moving on to section 5, nomimon is also tightly connected etymologically to nomizein. So could it be, as we saw in proposal C, Seif and Erzanan Tagnadza, that nomima are what people nomizein? I haven't found many places where Plato is actually appealing to that connection, but there are some. I have another one from the Gorgias, where what he refers to the nomima as something that the many nomizein. The many's nomima, and in that earlier text 6 from Gorgias that I did read out, what's established by their nomoi, are also the things they nomizein. But anyhow, when nomizein is playing an important role, it's kind of via nomos. So I want to double down. When you've got nomimon around, look for a nomos. Okay, and now I'm not sure this is exactly the right place to put this in the paper, but it belongs somewhere, and I'm going to put it right here. You've already got the idea that I think there are different kind of senses of nomizein or uses of nomizein that mirror the famous different senses of einai that people think about and that Leslie Brown gave us a talk about last time. So as you'll recall, with the senses of einai or SD in this argument to be, people talk about predicative, being F, existential, just existing. And then there are other ones out there, veridical and so on. One that I think is important that isn't always as discussed is one that Vlastos makes a lot of, sort of recognizing something as real or genuine, the genuine article. And I think that there are mirroring senses of nomizein, and so that's interesting when he says the many nomizein, the many beautifuls, and they don't nomizein the beautiful itself. That's similar to the beautiful itself is, and the many beautifuls are between being and not being. So we have a predicative sense of nomizein. You can use it with a predicate, right? So text 11, I did not translate it for you, but from the Euthyphro, the people nomizein tondia, the Zeus, the best of the gods. I did translate it for you. I paraphrased it. The best and the most just of the gods. So they nomizein Zeus best. They deem him the best or consider him the best. But it can also just be used grammatically complete, as Kraut and Leslie Brown teach us to say. So you can just say that, and here we have, finally, text 12 finally gives you the passage from earlier in the sight lovers argument. The one who nomizon kala pragmata, beautiful things, but doesn't nomizein the beautiful itself. So what do they recognize it as? It's not that they recognize it as big or as cool or whatever. It's here seems to just be they think it exists. They recognize it as existing. Okay, so maybe that is a different sense of nomizein, but maybe it's derived from the predicative, as Brown argues that the existential, the apparently existential, that is to say grammatically complete einai, is derived from the predicative or incomplete einai. To be is to be something or other. maybe to nomizein something is to nomizein it as something or other. They recognize the gods. In other words, they recognize that they're out there or they do stuff. Or maybe it's equivalent to this third sense, which I'm calling the honoring sense. By the way, I don't know of anyone who's discussed these different senses of nomizein. There may be a whole established discussion out there, which I'd love to know about. I'm just kind of making these up. The terms, I mean, not the idea. I'm finding the idea. Honoring, in other words, something like deem impressive. So a nice one from Lysias. They don't nomize either the gods or humans. It's not that they don't believe in humans, it's that they don't respect humans. They don't honor them. And a passage in the Gorgias that I won't go through right now, he moves from do they nomizein these people to be F to they don't nomizein them at all, meaning they don't honor them or pay them any accord. So I think what I'm inclining towards as a view about nomizein is that semantically it's always incomplete. That is to say, to nomizein something is to recognize it as F, where that could be just as as being, as a thing that is, or it could be as something important, or if there's something contextually salient like beautiful or big or whatever. And that's my, I probably should have put it then, but that's my argument for why ta nomima in this sight lovers argument shouldn't just mean things that exist, it should mean things that are recognized as having certain properties. Okay, so predicative is basic, is probably the simpler way to say what I just took you through. Okay. Here's my section 6 putting it all together proposal. The nomima at 479D, text 3, the problematic line, are things, physical objects, sights and sounds, and things made out of sights and sounds, and actions and things like that, which people nomizein to have some relevant property, like big or beautiful. Usually a positive property, like the honoring sense. And why do they nomizein it? Because there is a nomos. I haven't got to this yet, but we saw that Plato's use of nomimon usually has nomos in the background, because there is a nomos declaring that those things are big or beautiful, and so on. And maybe also just the existential sense. So I want to translate nomimon here, sorry, is conventionally deemed F, conventionally recognized, or conventionally honored. Okay, that's my sort of textual argument based on just the sight lover's argument and then looking at how he uses nomimon. What I want to do in the rest of the paper is say, let's take this as a hypothesis and see if it works, given Plato's view in the Republic of doxa and its objects. And my conclusion will be, in some cases it works really well, and in other cases it's sort of suggestive, is what I think. So what I want to show is that if Plato is here in the sight lover's argument using nomima and doxasta as two different names for the same thing, that fits well with how he thinks of doxasta elsewhere and how he thinks of doxa. Broadly speaking, the objects of opinion, the objects of doxa, are things that are conventionally attributed certain properties rather than things that really have those properties by nature. That's what I want to show. And I'm going to do it by talking about the two species of doxa. So on the divided line, instead of just talking about doxa, he talks about pistis, often translated as trust or faith, and Eikasia, often translated as imagination. Later he refers back and he says those two, quote, they together are doxa. I take that to mean they're two species of doxa, the two species. Okay, and what I want to show, pistis, I feel more confident that he really intends this view of pistis, that it's of things conventionally recognized. Eikasia, I think it fits with what he says, but maybe it wasn't sort of foremost in his mind. Okay, so in the good, who gets to have pistis? That's the better kind of doxa. Well, the way that you get pistis, I think, and I have a separate paper arguing this, which I would love to share with anyone who'd like to see it, but I think the way that you get pistis is by deferring to expert testimony. And in the good city, everyone will have pistis because everyone is going to defer to the philosopher-rulers. And everyone is going to form their beliefs about things based on the nomoi, customs, conventions, laws that the philosophers lay down. And the philosophers do that through laws, and especially laws concerning the musical education. And there's a wonderful passage which Adam recognizes as relevant And I think Reeve recognizes as relevant to my text 3 about the many nomima, about the beautiful, etc. And he uses a very similar language here. So he's saying why we need philosopher-rulers. That's because they have seen the forms and they can use the forms as a basis for creating the city and the characters of the people in the city as likenesses of the forms. And the way that he says they'll do it here, just to look at the part I underlined, they're gonna look at the forms, and in this way they will establish worldly nomima about beautiful things and just things and good things, or preserve the ones that need to be preserved. I should have underlined this for you in the Greek, so it'll be easy to see. But it's ta enthadi nomima kalon teperi, kai dikaion, kai agathon, very similar language to what we got in text 3. Okay, and here it could be conventions in the sense of rules, but it could also be, remember my text where he was talking about like footwear as nomima. So it could be things like that, practices. And that would be nice for me because then we could say, well, things like footwear, sorry, that was text, anyone find footwear? Text 8. Things like footwear, those could be kala pragmata, right? Those could be the kind of things that we expect the sight lovers argument to be about. Okay. Other passages, co-ed naked wrestling is a nomimon, that the practice isn't just that they do it, but the practice is, or the convention is that they say it's kalan. Socrates says people will laugh and think it's ice cream, but it's really kalon. And he refers to that in text 16 as a nomimon. And in general, the point of the musical education, I'm halfway down page 6, is to use good nomoi, a word he uses explicitly in describing what they're doing with the musical education, nomoi about what stories to tell, what paintings to paint, etc., in order to establish good nomima, or another way to put it, to shape what people nomizein to be shameful or fine, etc. And just as brief indication of nomizein, text 17, what we're trying to do when we tell the right stories is make sure that people nomizein, nothing more shameful than to hate each other. So we're trying to shape through the nomoi that they make about what stories to tell, they're trying to shape what people nomizein. In other words, they're trying to establish nomima. Okay, I have a lot of passages and I'm gonna have to skip some of them. I am gonna skip, although it's a great passage, text 18, where the musical education is gonna establish courage in the soldiers. I'll just point out the part I underlined, by establishing the doxa orthe te kai nomimon. So a nomimon doxa is gonna be a doxa that recognizes as just the things that really are just. So here nomimon does modify doxa, whereas elsewhere it modifies the things the doxa are about. Okay, why does this give you pistis if you are brought up in the good city? Because the nomima here, the conventions, are based on truth. The painters are using the divine model. So when you have a doxa, for example, did I give one? Yeah. This kind of haircut is appropriate for men of my age, or whatever it is. That doxa is based on the truth. It's a nomimon sorry, I shouldn't say the doxa is based on the truth. The object of the doxa, these kind of haircuts, is based on the truth. It's only a second remove from the truth, to use the language of Book 10, and therefore it counts as pistis. And very strong parallel between even though he doesn't say that the citizens who listen to the rulers will have pistis, there's a really nice analogy with what happens in Book 10 with the flute player, who is the expert who has episteme. He doesn't use the word nomima here or nomos, but he does say, I'll read out text 19, the flute player reports to the flute maker about flutes. Flute player has episteme, right? Which ones serve in flute playing? And he will order epitaxe. And if you look back at your text 7, we have the nomimos is the epitagma of the nomos. So the flute player is laying down some conventions. And then as a result, the flute maker who listens, the flute maker doesn't get episteme, but neither do they have the really crappy kind of doxa. Instead, they have pistis. And that's one of the only places, I think the only place in the Republic, where outside of the divided line and cave passages, Plato actually attributes pistis to someone. So pistis seems to be what you get when your doxa is set over good nomima, that is to say, nomima that conform to nomoi established by experts. Okay. And I've given you some examples. Text 18's doxa nomimon is text 19's pistis. Both are the result of accepting customs established by experts. And there'll be things like defending the city as kalon, rather than running away as kalon, or round holes for the flute makers are kalon. In text 3's terminology, that was the many nomima of the many, these doxae are set over nomima, peri the kalon, pre the kalon. That is to say, things commanded by a nomos about what's kalon, equivalently things deemed kalon, equivalently here things honored by the experts. And these things are, I hope, for Book 5's sight lover's argument to be valid, perceptible objects, or properties, or practices, round holes, or maybe roundness, or maybe the practice of making round holes in your flutes. Okay, that's pistis, and like I said, I feel like, yep, that really works. Plato really meant to say nomima, he really was thinking of things established by a nomos. Now we get to Eikasia, and here I think it works pretty well for value properties. And then towards the end, I'll talk about perceptible non-value properties like big or heavy. So in bad cities, he doesn't use these words, but I'm kind of using this framework to make sense of what he says. The nomima are established by the many, not by experts. And these nomima are amplified by sophists and poets and orators. And I think this is clear from a passage that doesn't explicitly use nomimon or Eikasia, but shows clear parallels with discussions of nomima and with prisoners in the cave, that is to say, people of Eikasia. Again, an appeal for help for secondary literature. I haven't seen anybody, this is 492 B to D. I haven't seen anyone compare this passage to the cave, but there must be people who do because it's so much like the cave. We've got echoes, we've got people hanging out together, and there's echoes and there's rocks. And I think philosophically it matches a lot also. So, whenever the many are seated together in assemblies, courtrooms, theaters, camps, any other public gathering, with loud uproar, censure some things that are said and done, and praise others, overdoing it with both clamor, clapping of hands, and in addition, the rocks echo and redouble the din, etc. In such cases, how do you think a young man's heart is moved within him? What private teaching do you think will hold out and not be swept away? Sorry, I should have said the context. This is about how a philosophical nature can be corrupted by bad paideia, so it's very dangerous. Because what's going to happen to this philosophical nature, he'll go hang out with the crowd, everybody's yelling, that's beautiful, that's ugly, that's just, that's unjust. And what's going to happen is that he'll be borne off on the current so that he will affirm the same things they do to be honorable and base. I underlined it this time in Greek, phasein teta auta tutois kala kai eiskra einai, and will practice the same things that they do. Okay, so here we have these beliefs and vocal affirmations. This is kalam, that's eiskran. What kind of things are they evaluating? Just like in the sight lovers argument, they're evaluating artworks and also craftsworks and political services. I should have put this on the handout, but in the sight lovers argument, even though he focuses on the sight lovers, he mentions at some point it's also the craftspeople and the praktikoi. Does he say politikoi? I think he does also. So, yeah, he has that, and then maybe later there's some politikos, but okay, it's a broader category. So we're talking about the same kind of objects that the sight lovers are concerned with, and here we have a bunch of ignorant people yelling out judgments, calling those things fine or shameful, and then we get an explicit connection to the sight lovers. And the argument is hard to follow. He says the philosopher shouldn't hang out with these people because these people are the wrong people to hang out with, and then he gives something that's just so much like the sight lovers argument. Bearing all this in mind, text 21, recall our former question. So think back to the sight lovers argument, the beautiful itself, is it possible for the multitude to bear it or think that it is? So he doesn't say nomizein there, right? We have Gkatzaras einai, but that was used as equivalent in the sight lovers argument to nomizein. Okay, so here's what I think we should take from this. Philosophers judge the form to be beautiful. The many judge these artworks and so on to be beautiful or ugly. So the many nomima about the beautiful, etc., my famous text 3, are the things, artworks, etc., which they deem beautiful, etc. And they do so not on the basis of conventions laid down by experts like philosopher-rulers, but on the basis of the conventions of their peers, which are then amplified and fed back to them, re-echoing by the sophists. So in other words, on the basis of cultural norms, nomoi, which are parallel to those of the experts. You've got cultural nomoi made by people, amplified by sophists and poets, and those establish these crappy nomima, which are the object of this crappy kind of doxa, namely Eikasia. I won't read out the quote from Bernier here from Culture and Society, but this is similar, even though he doesn't use the same language, to his view of what's symbolized by the cave. We're all just absorbing these bad values uncritically from our society. That's what happens in the cave. Okay, now I get to the most speculative part of the paper. So I hope I've made a case, take myself to have made a case more dogmatically, that both Pistis and Eikasia are based on nomima. Good nomima, established by good nomoi, established by experts for Pistis. Bad nomima, established by bad nomoi, established by the many for Eikasia. But so far, I've been talking about the kind of thing that is at issue in the text I just read out a moment ago, text 20, which are things like the kalon and the iskron, the just and the unjust also. All these kind of, let's call them value terms. And I think that that is a very unsurprising view to attribute to Plato, right? That he thinks that if you're not an expert, then you are kind of a sucker for convention or custom. You don't come up with your own views about value. You absorb the views of your culture. And the best thing that could happen to you if you're stuck in the cave is for you to absorb good views made by experts. But if you look back at the sight lover's argument, this is my text 1. He's not just talking about value terms. Towards the bottom of the first page, we have the beautifuls, and then we have the justs and the piouses. But then, just a bit lower down, we get doubles and halves, so mathematical things, and then we get bigs, smalls, lights, heavies. And that seems really different. So could Plato be meaning to refer to all of those as nomima? So is a big dog a dog that's conventionally recognized as big, and is not just a beautiful painting, but a heavy painting? If I try to move a painting and it's heavy, then that's just a nomimon again. Could that be what he has in mind? And I want to say, here's where I feel like I'm speculating or stretching a bit. I want to say, even if he didn't explicitly have it in mind, it certainly fits with a way of thinking about things that we could find in him, and we can find in a very influential predecessor whose influence is perhaps not as recognized as it should be, namely Democritus. So that's my last 5 minutes. I will try to establish that. Let me just read out text 1 while we're there. Famous passage, all the beautifuls will appear ugly, and so on. But the last part of this is sort of surprisingly about language in a way that isn't particularly obvious why it should be like that, or doesn't particularly obviously fit with the rest of the sight lover's argument. So, and bigs, smalls, lights, heavies, whatever we say they are, men, will they be called this any less than the opposite? No. Then each of the manys is not any more than it is, sorry, that's very hard to do in English or Greek, is not any more than it is not whatever someone says it is. So we have, is it malan e ukesten? And the answer is no, it's not anymore. Okay, so each of the many things, we call it something, we could equally well call it the opposite of that thing. And therefore, so that was a claim about language, metaphysical or ontological conclusion, that thing is no more what it is than its opposite. Okay, now, in text 3, so now I'm in my section 9, what's the scope? Is this, when we call these things nomima, is this about value properties or all perceptibles? So in text 3, when he says the nomima about the kalon, what's the scope? Well, maybe it's just about kalon and other value properties. Certainly kalon is what's relevant for sight lovers, and maybe the argument is really just about them. So the people who nomizein kala pragmata, or maybe them and the lovers of crafts, and it was practical people, not political people, that he throws in. at 476a, and there's also the passage, Alexander, you were mentioning with the technudrion there. But so maybe it's just some subset of people, and specifically the sight lovers, and so he says nomima here because he's thinking about value terms, and he kind of owes us an argument that the bigs and the smalls and the lights and the heavies are also rolling around between being and not being. He didn't give it here. So it's not a great argument, but at least it's not terrible. Okay, but here's another thought. As we just saw just before text 3, just before he said many nomima, we had this list of things like lights and heavies and doubles and halves and so on. So it would be weird if he had just forgotten about those at this point. He just expressly brought them in. Now recall what I just read to you in text 1, prosere thesatai. Oh, that's supposed to say face, sorry, fe also. Yeah, we have all of those things. Yeah, that fe is there also at the very end of that. So we have all these kind of what we call things or what we say things are. The contrast he's drawing attention to in text 1 is between what we call things and what they are. And this anticipates the mob. I said text 16, but I think I changed the numbering. That is, it's when we're in with the echoes, it's text 20, sorry. The mob in text 20, because there, if you look at the end of text 20, the top of this page 8, this also is about phasein ta'auta to tois kala kai aiskra. So what people call things. And it also anticipates the cave where the prisoners name the shadows. Oops, I've left out the passage there. There's a really interesting passage where they nomizein the shadows. Some texts have nomizein nomizein, which would make it even more relevant. Okay, and the idea that there's a connection between I call this thing beautiful. So what I'm suggesting is Plato is saying we call these things big or small is somehow connected to these things are big or small by convention. And there is some precedent for this idea that this could be true even for non-value properties. There's precedent for it famously in Democritus. So here's the one version of the famous passage, nomo gluku, kai nomo pikron, by convention or by nomos or custom, sweet, by nomos bitter, by nomos hot, cold, color, in reality, atoms and void. There's also a passage from Empedocles, which I wound up not putting on because it seems to be contested whether or not there's a nomizein there. But he says when there's a mixture, people think there's genesis, and that's their nomos. And so maybe this was a kind of idea that was in the air. The way that people say something that's not strictly speaking true, we could call that a nomos. Okay. And Democritus, okay, so he says this thing about the sweet and the bitter and so on. Why does he say it? Why doesn't he say instead, according to perception, sweet and bitter, but in reality, atoms and void, or relative to us, sweet and bitter? And different people have interpreted them in different ways, Galen and Sextus and people now. But somehow he seems to be associating the fact that everybody calls this thing this way, even though it's not really that way, with nomos. Now, the next text, which I seem to have forgotten to number, let's call it T20. Oh, no, I did. Sorry, T23. Good. This is from Metaphysics Gamma. So this is Aristotle's take on Democritus. We don't know if it's right, but I like it. So he is talking about people who think that all appearances are true. I'm quite confused by his argument here, how he thinks Democritus fits in, but I'm going to bracket that for the moment. We're talking about people who observe perceptibles. Sounds to me a bit like lovers of sights and sounds. They say that the same thing seems sweet to some who taste it and bitter to others. Oh, so we don't have a quotation from Democritus where he says that, but maybe the reason he says it's only nomoi, sweet or bitter, is because it's sweet sometimes and bitter other times, like the many beautifuls that also appear ugly. And they appear opposite to different animals or to one person themselves. So it's not true which things are true or false. And then we get the umalon, which is the no more than. For these ones are no more true than those ones, but equally so, these appearances or perceptions or seemings. And now we find out we're talking about Democritus. Democritus says nothing is true or it's unclear to us. And in general, it's because they suppose that perception is wisdom, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I just want to point out the connections with the sight lovers, at least according to Aristotle. Like the sight lovers, Democritus and also Empedocles, I cut him out here, but thinks that A, there's truth in how things appear to us. B, phronesis is perception, or wisdom is perception. So the sight lovers think they perceive beautiful things and therefore they have episteme. It's not quite thinking that it is, but it's based on perception. Like Socrates, Democritus thinks that for any perceptible quality F, something that appears F will also appear not F, for example, sweet and bitter. And therefore, the one appearance is no more true than the other. X is no more F than not F. So if you compare this to text 1 on the beautifuls, it's very similar. And Democritus concludes in our text that things have their perceptible qualities not in reality, but only normal by convention. So it looks like Democritus, or Aristotle's Democritus, put together with Sextus's Democritus, is appealing to a principle. Here's the principle. I called it principle. If X is no more F than not F, but we call it F, we do so by nomos. It's something that's deemed F rather than really being F. And this isn't a nomos that's grabbed out of thin air. It's not a nomos that's based on a law. It's a nomos that's based on our senses. But it's not just a report of the senses. It is a convention. And therefore, we could say sweet things are nomima. Heavy things are nomima. Big things are nomima, etc. They're things that are called what they are or have the properties they have only by convention. Okay. Who's setting down these conventions? It's not the law, it's the senses. And now we have the famous sight lovers passage. I think it's my last passage, text 24. The senses say these contradictory things. Much like every beautiful thing appears ugly, the senses say that the same finger is both big and small, soft and hard. And we have this speaking language. People have noticed this here. They parangele to the soul. I'll just read the underlined parts. They lege, that the same thing is soft as is hard. Got to underline that. They are hermenei, interpreters or messengers. And the things they announce are the esangelomenon. So the senses are testifiers or speakers, like the many in the crowd, or like the flute player, or like the philosopher kings. They're laying down nomoi. They're laying down claims, this is soft, this is hard, this is big, etc. And the soul, if it believes them, the soul has mere doxa. Okay. I'm almost done. I'm going to end with what Whitney Schwab taught me to call the so what section. Apparently that is what high school teachers and the elementary school teachers teach it, and his wife taught him that. The so what section is like, okay, if I'm right, what's the philosophical upshot of all of this? What do we learn by construing doxasta as things that are conventionally deemed F, or conventionally deemed to exist, or things that are honored? Very briefly, metaphysically, we get a new view of the deficiency of perceptibles, in other words, of doxasta. Their problem is that they don't have their qualities in themselves, but only by convention. Metaphysically, this is not a super deep view, I think, because it leaves open the question of where they get those, where the conventions originate, and then I think we fall back on familiar and plausible stories. They have their properties because they're perceived to have them, or things like that, or appetites tell them, or they're just brute facts about how things appear. But we do get this interesting nomos physis distinction in the perceptible realm, which we might not have known Plato had. Epistemology, we get a really interesting view of doxa that fits with how some people think of doxa. All doxa is on the basis of deferring to testimony. Better doxa is on the basis of better testimony, expert testimony, and where this is going to include the testimony of the senses. If you want to have episteme, ignore testimony, close your eyes, don't listen to anybody, and think for yourself. Okay, the end.
So I think let's just open the floor for questions.
Something went wrong.
I think that,
You do it.
yes, I think the nomimon is that we start with the people from online, but
Okay.
let's reverse the order. Shall we start with them?
Okay, you tried to teach me how to show them. I just muted you by accident, I think. Can you unmute yourself? Leslie? Oh, can somebody else be in charge of this, please?
Hi.
Okay.
Have I been called on?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No
well,
problem.
thanks, Jessica. That was a really great paper. Oh, it's slightly weird. You're looking away from me. No, it's all right. You're still looking away from me. I'll just keep talking.
Okay. Hi, Leslie. Thank you for coming.
Hi. Really great paper. Thank you very much. Lots to chew on. And I just have one quick, immediate reaction. I think you've still got a big problem with the doubles and the halves, but set that on one side for the moment. I thought your way to bring perceptual properties into the story, when, as you say, they're much harder to bring into the story than value properties. I like that a lot. And I just wanted to mention the way that in the Theaetetus, we get a kind of analogy between value properties and perceptual properties. That's to say, to begin with, we get the relativism of perceptual properties, and then we get the excursus into how in a polis different things are deemed halcyon and dikaion and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to offer you that as a kind of backup for what you were trying to do at the end of the paper. But as I say, I think you've still got a problem with the doubles and halves, but maybe one can't accommodate everything. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And actually, I didn't put the passage on the handout, but I had thought about that Theaetetus passage when he's talking about the just and so on. And I think I'm remembering he does use nomizein there, that whatever a city nomize to be just and so on. I hadn't thought about the idea. So you're thinking he starts with perceptibles and then moves to value properties, and we should take that as encouragement that he's treating them as on a par? I think yes. Okay, thanks so much. And I'd love to hear, what you think about the doubles and the halves and so on when they come. Thank you. Am I calling on people? Benjamin Morrison.
Hi, Jessica. Thank
Hi,
you
Ben.
for a great paper. I'm really attracted by that reading of nomima, relating it to the nomisto from earlier. I really like that idea. But I have a question for you about the sight lovers and the many. And I couldn't quite tell whether you thought that these were the same people. Put this another way, you've got in T3, your T3, you've got the many nomima of the many about the beautiful and so on. In your view, that's things conventionally determined to be beautiful or something like that. And then between T3 and T4, we have there's a sort of there's a few lines, right? I mean, and then T4 is the conclusion about the lovers of sights and sounds. That's clearly a reference to them, tous polakala theomenus. But do we want to think that the sight lovers are also cases of the many? Because you might think that there's a difference between them, that the sight lovers are a bit unusual, perhaps, that they're not like the many. They don't necessarily have their doxa just enforced on them by convention. So anyway, it's a genuine question. Do you take these groups to be the same? Can you sort of fill in the gap in that case as to why they count as the same?
Great, that's a really good question. And I was emphasizing the mystery of him suddenly switching to nomima, but I think there is also a mystery of him suddenly switching to the many, because the rest of the argument is about the sight lovers, and he has mentioned a few other special groups, but they are a little bit special, crafts people and practical people. So why the many here? Sorry, I don't have the raise hand function, says Whitney. Sorry. Okay, we'll call on him next. Sorry. I think that I don't know. So I definitely was treating the many's nomima here as including the sight lovers' nomima. And I guess if we think about the cave, which I'm putting them in the cave, I think the sight lovers have Eikasia rather than Pistis. So I think they are the lower down types. So I don't see I definitely see a textual reason to be puzzled about the switch, but I think that we're going to wind up with the same kinds of things, sights and sounds and stuff like that. And then when he goes on, I mean, the fact that he talks about the bigs and the doubles and the halves and so on, that also seems to take us beyond the sight lovers. So I guess my best answer is that this argument sort of uses the sight lovers as paradigms, but it sort of switches in and out of focusing on them.
Can I do a quick follow-up? Yeah, I'm wondering about the following. Whether it's an interim conclusion about the nomima of the many, and that's just saying, well, what are the objects that those people are focused on? Answer, it's the things rolling around between being and not being. And it's like, oh, well, in that case, presumably it's those same objects that the lovers of sights and sounds are also interested in. So there's a train of thought there. And I'm just thinking that then you don't have to think that ta, ton, polon, polan, nomima, etc., is coextensive with ta doxaster. It could be a subgroup of them, for instance. It's just that we're focusing there on one particular kind of way of having suboptimal cognition. That's the many. And we're saying, well, look, I guess that must be about the things that roll around between being and not being. So I guess that must be what's going on with the sight lovers. And so I assume that doxa as a whole must be about these suboptimal metaphysical things, and just takes a bit of pressure off thinking that all these expressions are coextensive.
Nice, good. Okay, I like that. I do think it's got something in common with the other readings that I was considering of nomima, where it's going to work, but we're just missing some, right? He just sort of condensed it. Maybe some lines dropped out or something like that. We've got extra work to do. But yeah, I find that attractive. Thank you. I didn't read the whole thing, but I think Whitney was saying he needs to go. Can he ask a question? Okay, or could we ask Whitney, who said he has to go? I know there was a sad group of people who showed up an hour early because they were confused about daylight savings. That'd be okay. Okay, he didn't have his hand up. So I'm calling on you, Whitney, although I cannot see you. Oh, you think I can click? It's very hard to click over here. Oh, yeah. Whitney.
I'm here.
Gotcha. Talk away.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I had a version of Ben's question that I won't ask now because I think it's a word that maybe it's too narrow for then how he goes on to use it in kinesis and use it generally, but I think what you said. And I just have one question, and I might just miss something.
Talk a little slower. I can't understand you.
Well, not the first time. So in the so what section,
Yes.
I just wasn't sure that I fully grasped how what you've said leads us to say that perceptibles don't have the qualities themselves, but only by convention, as opposed to they're subject to convention, but maybe also they do have qualities themselves. I just wasn't sure. I wasn't sure where.
Good. So I was following up on the idea that we were getting in Democritus, and generally the idea that when you're, if you're Plato, for example, in the Gorgias, you're contrasting nomos and physis. Now you might want to say there is a nomos that's based on physis, or there's a nomos that gets things as they are. But if you're just referring to things as nomima, then the idea seems to be that they are conventionally deemed that way rather than really being that way. And that would certainly fit with the idea that they're between being and not being in context. So maybe you could make it clear from context that this is something that's deemed F and really is F. But it seems like in the context, the things we're calling nomima are things that are deficiently beautiful or so on. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll have to think more. I would have thought there's space, given what you've said, to say they're deemed F, but also, okay, I'll just have to think more.
I just think Plato thinks they aren't, right? Like the many beautifuls, it's not true that they are beautiful. They're between beauty and beautiful and not beautiful.
Well, I agree, but I thought what you were doing is giving interpretation of his argument for that very claim. Like, and the problem is if that's how we're reading, because it's the nomima of the many, right? So they are things deemed by the many to be F. There's space for them to be F, even if.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. I think it
Probably.
was just a mystery about why call them nomima. I think there's a separate argument that they're between being and not being. But good. Thank you so much. And sorry to rush. And Thanassis. Yes.
Yes.
Thanassis.
Hi, Jessica. Very nice to see
Hi,
you.
nice to see you. I'm so sorry you couldn't come. Yeah.
I wish I were there, but better to be here rather than give you and others my cold.
Thank you.
So, okay.
That's a good nomos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
So, thank you for your very interesting presentation. So many things to discuss. So, I will restrict myself to three brief comments. The first one is the case of nomizein, the verb nomizein and nomima. It seems, if we see in premise one in your handout, that the verb nomizein is applied not only to the pola, but also to forms. Okay.
Yeah.
So not only the site lovers nomizing the many beautiful things, etc., but also we may think that philosopher nomizing as well the forms.
Good.
And
Yeah.
as we see in 476 C, etc., it seems to me that Plato interchanged the verb nomizing with the verb igume. I think you mentioned
Yes.
it
Yeah.
in your presentation. Okay.
Hegumen einai.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, this is the first one. The second one is about the scope you mentioned, about the nomima. It seems to me pretty obvious that it is about the opposites. I mean, only things that belong to the pairs of opposites and nothing else. This is where Plato can apply his theory about things that lay between F and not F. This would be strange if things were not nomima. I think he could not apply his argument in other things other than nomima. This is the second. And the third one is the distinction between the object of Pistis and Eikasia, where nomima applies to things that are by convention. Okay. Okay. Conventions means that it can be anything rather than the truth, etc. It seems to be something, it could be something distinct. Not necessarily, but it could be. But if we see in the simile of the cave, for example, the object of Eikasia and the object of Pistis, we have the puppets or the idols or whatever we might call it, and their shadows. I mean, in this case, it cannot be a conviction. There seems to be a relation between the objects of Eikasia and the object of Pistis. The shapes are formed by the puppets or the idols. It cannot be something
Good.
separate. And later on, Plato says somewhere, shadows of justice, etc.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that it cannot be 100% by convention, maybe 80%, but not 100%. Okay, thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, and I need to do a lot more work to try to figure out how this view relates to other things I think about the objects of Pistis and Eikasia, right? So Pistis, the things at Pistis are only a second removed from the truth, and the things at Eikasia are at a third removed from the truth. So I guess the quickest thought I'm having is something like the conventions of the many are sort of like distorted versions of good conventions. So if it's right to recognize people who do their own work as just, if that's a good nomimon, then it is a distorted version of that to recognize people who help their friends and harm their enemies as just. That would be an example where maybe that second one is somehow a distorted version of the first one. But yeah, that's a whole kettle of worms, can of worms. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, good. Hey, David.
Hi,
David
Jessica.
Murphy, hi.
I'm sorry that my camera's still not working, but I'm not sorry that I heard your talk. It was wonderful, and I learned a lot. And I really like what you did with the meanings of nomima. My question's a little bit like a mixture of Whitney's and Thanassis. I'm wondering about perceptible objects being divided into two groups in 523b, which leads up to the fingers passage, and that kind of leads up to your T24, because in 523b, Socrates says that some things in perception are chrenomena, like discerned or judged sufficiently by perception, but then others call thinking into play. And I'm wondering, like Thanassis, whether a lot of the nomima are going to be coextensive with things that fall on like an axis of enantia. So hot, cold, those are things that have an enantion in there, either at one of the two poles or in the middle, but something like three fingers, three doesn't really have an enantion. So I'm wondering how those kind of perceptual objects fit in to the explanation of, perception and nomizo.
That's really interesting, and I'm not sure I have anything good to say about it right now. I definitely see the point that the summoners are going to be the ones that have opposites. And it's also true that, as Thanassis was saying, it looks like all the examples we get in the sight lovers arguments are the opposites. I think I probably don't have anything new to say. There's a good, interesting debate about whether Plato only thinks there really are forms for these opposite types and whether he only thinks that the sensibles are deficient in respect of these opposites. But I want to think about it because it seems like my view ought to say that things like being three or being a finger is also a nomimon. So I think I don't want to have it cut across at that joint, but just say those are the ones that were useful for him to bring up in the sight lovers argument because it's clear why they're deficient. But let me think on that more. Thank you.
I would just wonder whether the testimony that's happening when I look at fingers and see three of them, that's coming from my senses, but it's not coming from the many or sight lovers or people around me influencing me, as it would if I thought they were beautiful.
Right.
So
Good.
that was what I was hung up on.
Good. Yeah. So the senses are giving testimony. Some of it is summoning testimony and some of it isn't, but it's all coming from the senses. So I think I want to say it's all nomoi. But let me think on that more. Thank you.
Another two questions.
Thank you, room people, for being very patient.
Another just two questions. Relax.
Yes. You hear me?
Yes. Hi, Anjay.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I wonder, so I want to ask you about your first argument about whether the argument as a whole is invalid if we take nomima to refer to some kind of belief or something like that. So one might, I would ask you about, so I think your argument relies on the fact that when you take the following reply, sorry, I don't have an English translation and I am incapable.
We can do Greek.
So I read in Greek. So it's D6.
479?
Yes. So just after the next reply, right? Ho homologesamen dege eiti toiuton phaneie. And I think your argument relies on the assumption that the ti toiuton refers directly to the nomima.
Well, I was thinking that there's just a kind of continuous chain of reference.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
you
okay.
could go all the way back. You could go further back, but certainly it would be weird if nomima referred to something else. Yeah.
Okay, so my suggestion is that it does refer to something back, and there are reasons for having nomima referring to some kinds of belief.
Okay.
And this is the following. So my suggestion would be that your argument integrates an analysis of the broader context, starting with the reply at B5, or at B7 or 8. Poteron un esti malon e esti ekaston ton polon tuto o antisfe auto einai. And the suggestion is that the toiuton here in the first reply that I read refers to precisely this sentence with the with the neuter in the singular and so on. And that beginning at B10, you have an ending with the sentence that you commented. There is a kind of parenthesis which is prompted by the fact that is it Glaucon we're speaking now?
Yeah.
Is comparing the kind of object that the preceding sentence refers to, which are no more than they are not, and he compare it with the enigmata, with something that people say in the banquets, so some kind of speech-related item. And then you have, he develops his comparison with this enigmata, and Socrates replies, yes, these kinds of things too are ambiguous, epamphotérizein, and then it ends with eurekamen ara os eureken otita taton polanomima, and that I take to be some kind of extension of the reference to the enigmata that should be developed and argued for, but we are at the level of language, things.
Sorry, just to make sure I understood, you think the nomima are the enigma?
No, but
No,
that there is a relationship between the two, and that there is a broadening from Glaucon's comparison to something which does not belong really to the argument of Socrates, and then with the pro homologekam samen eidere, we have accorded before, he skips the parentheses, so to speak, and he refers to what he has been saying in V-VII. So
okay.
that I think is a way to save the nomima because I think your arguments about, or what you said about nomima peri is absolutely right. I mean, it's nomima peri is to think something. Well, the most evident, obvious is to think something about something. So that's my suggestion. And
that's really interesting, and I'm attracted by it a bit, but I want to revise. Sorry, I think it's not going to work for the argument to be valid. So I want to revise what I said a bit. I was just reading over this again. So the problem is that by B8, we've only got, we haven't got the full-blown conclusion that the many beautifuls are between being and not being. We've got this preliminary claim about them, that they're not anymore what someone says they are, than the opposite. Then it's only about the nomima that we have down in D, in D1 through 3. It's or 2 through 4. It's the polynomima that are kulendetai, that are rolling around between being and not being, what is and purely and what's not. And then in the next line, the one that you were starting with, D6, so we agreed before that if titoiuton phanei, there I think titoiuton has to mean something that's between being and not being, because that's what they agreed. We agreed that if we could find something between being and not being, that would be the doxaston. So I think if we take the predicative reading of einai, then maybe you say, yeah, he really almost got there in B9. He doesn't need to spell it out by saying that they're between, in B6, by saying that they're no more F than not F. He has said that they're between being and not being, but he hasn't explicitly spelled it out. So I really see the nomima passage as a crucial part of the argument. And if it's about something else, then I still think the argument doesn't work. So,
okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hi, Ro.
Yeah, do you hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you for your paper and your talk. So it's very interesting and helpful for me. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about the relation between this time dianoia and pistis. So you have said in your paper, in your handouts, section 7, and referring to text 15, the wise rulers established conventions based on forms via the laws and, for example, musical education. And then my question is, you have said in your latest book, in your book, that dianoia has a cognitively intermediate status. So because it touches on the other hand, on the one hand forms, and on the other hand the sensible things like nomima. So so my first question is then, this wise ruler, as a legislator or lawgivers, is said to have dianoia, or said to be in the state of dianoia? That's the first question. And the second
Sorry, just so I make sure I heard it. Are the rulers in a state of dianoia, did you say?
yeah, as a legislator, legislator.
Yeah, I don't think so. What I argued in the book is that they're in some kind of unnamed state that's like the converse of dianoia. So like people with dianoia, they're thinking about perceptibles as images of forms. But in their case, so for the people with dianoia, like geometers, they haven't yet grasped the forms, and they're using the perceptibles for the sake of thinking about forms. And this is the opposite. They have grasped the forms, and they're using the forms now while they're legislating for the sake of shaping the perceptibles. So it's symmetrical in a way to dianoia, but different. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Then the second question is then, for example, there's a lot things that the wise ruler as legislator declare as good or as beautiful. For example, one might declare as a law that a fair distribution. This is like this is not particular action or particular thing or particular policy, but something abstract or something hypothesized thing. Form is fair distribution. Well, nobody knows but what it is, but anyway, in this situation, fair distribution. Then therefore, nomima can be, for example, raising minimum wage, for example, or donation of the rich, or even a particular action. So I have to share my possession with others, for example. Then between these various things on various ontological degrees, what is exactly nomima? What can we
good, right. So is it types, or is it particular actions and so on? Good question. Alexander is looking at me significantly because he thinks it's types. Yeah, I choose to remain neutral for the purposes of this talk. Yeah, I have tended to think of it as particular things, but there's no reason that I mean, nomima seems to fit better with the idea that it's types, right? Practices, like the examples we had in my text 8 about, you know, hairstyles or things like that. That seems, I guess you could take that as individual ones, but yeah, the kind of thing or practices. So great. Okay, I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to end. I know Gail had to leave early, so maybe we'll take one last from the screen, and then we'll go. It's Gail. She's part of our series. Okay, thank you, Ro. And Gail. Gail, fine.
Hi. Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
A lot to think about, really interesting. I had one question that was, it's not a question, just a comment, but related to what Andre Locke said, which is that as you represented the argument from Republic 5, it would indeed be invalid if we concluded that nomima were beliefs. But that's, I think you're assuming, as many people do, that the argument uses the ontic terms about being and so on just predicatively throughout. And if, like some people, you think it begins with a veridical and then there's a shift to the predicative, so that he's first talking about knowledge being over truth and so on, then it's not would not be surprising in the same way, or there's a way.
That's good.
Yeah. So one would have to defend your interpretation.
I think, let me just respond to that quickly. So I actually tried to just avoid as the question of what einai means, although I did wind up thinking predicative is norm, but I tried to just do it by looking at these terms that I underlined in the various premises. So beautiful colors and shapes in premise 1, and then the many beautifuls in premise 3, and then also in premise 1, beautiful pragmata, and the many beautifuls, and so on and so on. So I was just trying to say that nomima, I think, and I've had interesting challenges about this from various people, but I was thinking that nomima is supposed to refer to the very same objects as the phrase, for example, kala pragmata, or beautiful colors. So I was trying to avoid einai and not make it rest on that. But I definitely see how, I mean, I see how your reading fits really well with the idea that it's beliefs.
Yeah. And then another just a brief observation again. I think you were assuming, but maybe I'm wrong about this, that when Plato predicates kalon of, say, a nomimon or something, that would be evidence that it has to be something other than a belief or a law or something like that, that it would have to be like a beautiful object. But there are places in book 6, I'm sorry, I don't have the right reference, where logos is referred, or like in the symposium and the theory of the psychic pregnancy passages where logoi are referred to as kala.
Good, definitely, yeah. I was thinking if it were just beautiful, then I'd be happier with that. I was thinking that in the sight lovers argument, my text 1, we also get big and double and heavy, and I was having a lot harder time seeing how a law could be seen as both big and small or both heavy and light. But definitely, yeah, I mean, I see the appeal of reading A and what I called reading A and reading B philosophically quite a bit. I'm just thinking.
Can I ask you one more thing, or do you want to move on? There are other.
I'm gonna I think. How many hands do we have in the audience? We have a bunch, but yeah, I think I'm gonna move on and ask you and get to write. Okay, will you write to me? Okay, thank you, Gail. I hope you will write it to me, or I'll write to you. Okay, go ahead.
Jessica, this is very, very interesting, and I am excited about this reading of nomima. But I wanted to ask exactly what the nomimon is in the case, say, of perceiving a dog as big.
Yeah.
So let's go to a non-evaluative property. Yeah. And what is the implied contrast and what is the nomos in operation? Because I think that has to do very much with what sort of deficiency we find in the sensibles. So is the implied contrast that the dog, and that is what the comparison with Democritus seemed to me to suggest, is the implied contrast that the dog is really neither big nor small, these are sensible properties and they exist only normal, or is it something more like the many, the nomimony is that the dog is big, period. Whereas in truth, the dog is big only with qualification.
Good.
And if so, if the latter, as I think is the case, then could the nomos, at least in T3, I don't want to make a more general claim, but then could the nomos be linguistic habit?
Linguistic habit?
Yes.
Nice, good. I think that there's a lot of support for, okay, so a bunch of things to say. First of all, my analogy with Democritus wasn't meant to go so far as to say that Plato doesn't think that anything is big or small. Of course he does. He thinks the form of the big is big and the form of the beautiful is beautiful. Right, so I think that the convention is something like we take a word, a term that doesn't strictly or literally or really apply to something and we apply it to that. So you can imagine that. I keep on saying that, all my students are stars, and someone says, but they're not really stars. And I say, well, this is a convention. I call them stars. Or maybe to get closer to the real case, I have a dog that's like pretty big, and I call it big, and someone says, that dog's not that big. It's not big compared to this one. And I say, well, it's big for dogs around here, or it's big in some relative way, or it's the biggest dog I've had, or whatever. And I have this convention where I don't, exactly what you were saying, I don't express all those qualifications. I just use the term as if it applied, full stop. So that's the kind of convention I have in mind. Thinking of it as linguistic habit is really nice. It might downplay, if you think about my text where what was it called, Text 20, where all the crowds are together and they're yelling out, this is beautiful and that's ugly and so on. And if you think about what's in the cave, where they're presumably identifying different shadows as that one's a dog or that one's a tree or whatever, it seems like it's a bit more than just linguistic habit. It's a bit stronger, right? It's a kind of, they don't even notice. I think that's so I've argued in my book that doxa, there's a kind of mistake built into doxa. People who have doxa are dreamers, he says. That's the first way he introduced the contrast between doxa and epistemic. So they don't know they're following a convention. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you very much. That's a nice one. And certainly he connects it to naming things and calling things and so on. So great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for the talk. Well, I have two, a suggestion and a question. I do not know if the reference would be of any help, but there is also this Kroia by the notorious Stoic philosopher that he was forging the coin, paraharatein to nomisma. And meaning, so the sense transmigrates from what is paradigmatically a value item, there's no other more than that, to the belief or to the common wisdom. You know about this?
The coin is a nomisma.
Which was the Stoic philosopher who came from, it's not Zeno, Diogenes, perhaps. Yeah, Diogenes. Cynic.
Okay.
So the Kroia is that what he did was to forging the coin because his father was So there's this ambiguity within the Kroia that. He is forging the coin. There was some rumor that he had made some forgery himself. And the ambiguity is on the fact that what he was really suggesting is that he was altering common beliefs. You did not know about that?
No, I didn't. That's interesting. So you're thinking by altering an object, you do alter beliefs?
That's
nice.
To the paradigmatic object, which represents value, the coin. So on the one hand of the ambiguity is forging the coin, and on the other, forging the nomisma, which is the belief, the implication being that he was attacking common wisdom and the nomismata of the many. Not the coins.
Does it actually use that phrase, nomismata
yes.
con palon? Oh,
It's very laconical. What I'm doing, I'm forging the coin. And this is upon this ambiguity.
Very nice. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I will find that.
And the other, well, it's a question. You were taking pains into defending yourself upon several attacks against your argument. Well, I did not buy any of that. I think that they were not worth defending. That the argument, the criticism you suggested against your own argument, it's not valid. That your argument runs smoothly. I was more worried about what Thanassis and Schwab later on. But let me try to depict this as follows. It's not incomprehensible. It's not that something that must be a priori excluded, that Plato begins, as you suggest, upon a criticism of value terms, like things that are enforced by degrees or laws, which is more easy to swallow for the audience or for the reader, and then the sense transmigrates to other things too, like the beautiful, which is less easy by analogy.
Or the big or the heavy.
So the suggestion is that as it is easy for you to understand that it might be a criticism on this level, then take under account the possibility that there are people, sophists or the censors or common wisdom that legislates under quotation mark, on these things. And then take also under account the possibility that even the big and the small are among these things.
Yeah. Good.
So,
Right. So there's
yeah.
conventions about that, or there's
Yeah.
common beliefs about that. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. The talk was extremely stimulating. And so I'll try to make a very quick question, perhaps aligning to what Ben Morrison asked. So how would you collocate in your framework the beliefs of a character like Callicles? And you also cited a passage of the Gorgias. So apparently Callicles has beliefs of some kind, which he develops against what Socrates describes as nomima. And they are exactly against what the majority think. So how does it fit in your reading? And sort of, in other terms, what's the notion of convention or shared opinion?
Very nice. Okay, good. So it's one thing when we think about the many who agree and they all do these things, and then Callicles is off on his own going against the many. So do we want to say that I'm just spelling out for myself, walking through your thought. So your thought is, he's not following the many's nomoi, certainly he's not following the experts' nomoi.
Exactly.
He's got his own views, but he doesn't have episteme, right?
And
In
he's
fact, he's wrong
against
about things.
both the experts and the many.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? So we certainly don't want to say he has episteme. I don't think we want to say he has dianoia either, right? Because he's not questioning. I mean, yeah, this is
He's also very
interesting.
clever.
I'm gonna give a sweeping kind of answer. I want to think about this a lot more carefully. My sweeping answer is that people have often pointed out, characters like Callicles or Thrasymachus who are able to question conventional beliefs are in a way like the kind of dark antithesis of Socrates, right? They're agreeing with him that there's something defective about conventional morality. So they're somehow standing outside of the cave somehow. But I don't know how to fit them in. I think that's a really interesting question. And do they belong? Yeah, do they have
It
some
works
other
very
dimension?
well. I just had this concern. So
Yeah, no,
thank
that's
you.
a great one. Okay, just write it down.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess it would be very difficult to think that Callicles is going up, probably down also. And I had a little concern of probably going downhill than instead of uphill for Callicles. I also had the concern about the use of physis and nomos, because if you think of this of that distinction through Democritus' perspective, then physis can be reality. But I don't think that this is operating in the Republic or in Callicles. It's more of a challenge, I think, and not yet something that you can think of as reality. So it's only when Plato criticizes this distinction that it becomes something normative. But my suggestion and question at the same time, and I'm glad that Leslie Brown brought up the Theaetetus, is that you could somehow not only bring in Democritus but also Protagoras, and think of the testimony of Aristoxenus saying that Plato copied everything from Protagoras, because you have the middlemen with the puppets there, and how people are changing people's opinions. When you think of this passage, you refer to it, but that is attributed to Protagoras in the Theaetetus. So how nomos is the realm that experts who are not philosophers are working with, but they can still do something with it that could somehow communicate with truth, maybe, if they're wise enough.
Nice. Okay, that's a great suggestion to follow.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. It was very interesting indeed.
Thank you.
I would like to suggest something and put it here for question. Okay, did you? I think that you observed that when he in T4 he speaks of the sight lovers, and yet in T3 he speaks about the many.
Yeah.
So considering many to be not experts.
Yes.
Okay. So here's my suggestion.
Okay. Actually, let me just stop with that and just say, Ben, I'm not sure if you could hear that, but that's an interesting suggestion that the site lovers having them interchangeable with the many, Ben and Whitney, probably not there, but is because they're non-experts. That is an interesting way to think about it, right? They're not ordinary, but they're all not experts. Maybe, yeah. Okay,
So I'm
fine.
going elsewhere in a different direction.
Okay.
So I think that ton polon refers to the polon we find in the previous lines on T1. Πότερον εστί μάλλον ιού και στην έκαστον των πολλών. Τα πολλά, in this context, always refers to all this, the many beautiful, the many just or unjust, the heavy, the light. This των πολλών could be a reference to this one, and not the many, the non-experts or the side lovers.
Not the many people, but
not
the
the
many
people,
things.
the many things. And now watch what happens if you read it this way. Then we would read τα πολλά νόμιμα των πολλών περί του καλού και των άλλων, which means everything. And here we can draw a different conclusion, which says that it is a convention, τα πολλά νόμιμα, but now τα πολλά means the many different conventions, which includes the opposites. Τα πολλά νόμιμα, τα των πολλών πολλά νόμιμα, the many conventions about all this we consider beautiful, just or unjust, or not beautiful. So it's not a convention about what is a convention of something being F, but a convention of something being F or not F.
Okay, I want this to work. I'm not quite sure I'm getting the grammar of it. Sorry, this is really interesting to me. So if we could just walk through it. So we've got in my text 3, ta ton polon pola nomima, kalu te peri kai ton alon. And you're thinking that the peri is still going with kalu, kai, with kalu, right? It's still about the beautiful,
Yes.
right? So what's the ton polon doing in the genitive? Ta ton polon pola nomima. The nomima of
Η γενική διαιρετική.
distribution, the many of them distributive
Or
genitive.
about the many. Τα νόμιμα about the many or of the many.
Of the many things. Yeah, so this is hard for me because I want the nomima to be the many things, and I'm still not sure how that's going to, what we really want, and this is what I was trying to do with saying, like, let's keep this argument valid, is we really want the pola nomima, those are the things that are being identified as between being and not being, right? So we want the pola nomima to just be another name for ta pola kala. And I think on your reading, they're not. I think on your reading, the nomima are something about the kala, right?
You would like to?
The ground level of pola.
Yeah.
There's a kind of power set of the pola of polon.
Ah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, I got it. Okay. Well.
The manys of the many. There are many, they are the ground level, and the many believe so about
We have
this
to talk
many
on the
things. No, but it does work. It does work.
There is a last question.
I don't know if it's believable, but it works. Agree.
Sorry, I just say thank you. That's really interesting, and I want to think about it.
The nomimon thing is to say how wonderful your paper was. So
Thank
I do that. I hope that's Pistis rather than Eikasia. Can you tell me what you think the range of ta nomima is in T3?
Well, that was my question towards the end. So I want it to be at least all the things that are mentioned in text 1. So I want it to be at least the many beautifuls, the many just,
But
pious, etc.
what are those? What are those? In other words, are the nomima there big things? If they're big things, then it's unlikely that you would call them pola, because it's not just that they're everything, right? Whereas in all contexts where we have the attempt to define anything, the mistake that people make, in fact, not just the mistake that people say, like Mino says explicitly, and there are pola alla, right? Or Euthyphro, there are pola alla, not just what I said, many other things, right? But those now are a relatively smaller range of things, you see. So what I said your book is almost perfectly correct. Where it is not, I think, has to do with whether we're talking about specific individuals or answers to Socrates' questions. And the sight lovers and all that are giving answers to that question. They never say the finger is large. I mean, there's an issue there, but that's not what's in the passage here. Here, what they say is what Euthyphro says: prosecuting religious wrongdoers is pious, or being 2 feet long is long. And it's those things that are between, on the one hand, what it is to be large or long, and what is in no way, right? It's not the finger itself or so let me put it another way. If it's individual, specific, particular objects, then the pola nomima of the polloi are everything there is, and there's only one answer to what they are. Everything. That's what they are, right? And that's not the right question. The right question is between the one right answer, to be beautiful is whatever, say to be just is to do your own, and the many answers that people give to it's returning your what you owe, it's harming your enemies and things like that. That to me makes much more sense, and it fits with a dialectical context that brings us to the sight lovers point. So it's very important, I think, to try to see what the range of nomima is. For you, the range of nomima is the sensible world.
Well, good. Okay, so I do recognize that I have said something that I think supports your view, which is the idea that nomima are often practices or customs. So I wonder, I mean, sometimes I just...
I agree with everything you said, except for that.
This one thing, so I should change. But I do wonder, I mean, this might not be a great way to make peace, but I sometimes am not sure if Plato is distinguishing so closely between individuals and types.
That could be.
What do you think is happening in text 8, where here we have an example where things are actually called, he explicitly refers to things as nomima, and the things are the sige, the silence of the young.
To be silent
so
when the old people are around is... whatever
a type or something, you think, right? It's a custom, a practice or something. So, but maybe, right.
Children should be heard, seen but not heard. That's what it is. So you can, the thing is, you can, and even with a finger, remember the senses tell you that it's both. But what they tell you is, in fact, it is large compared to that, and it is small compared to that. And we accept it as correct. Right? It is. And the moment you make it relative, as you were saying before, Plato has no problem about it. He knows that returning what you owe to somebody who's not crazy is just. It just does. No, sorry, it is not it is just. It's a just action.
But he does say.
But it's not a correct definition.
Okay.
You see, if it's correct because that particular case of returning what you owe is a case of doing your own. That's what makes it just.
Okay, so it's not that very same action, this token is going to on another occasion be unjust, but that this practice is going to be, okay, that's a nice, I'll take that. I'll consider that.
I said I agree with absolutely everything.
Well, that is my goal, 99%. Do we have time for Gail's last question, or?
Gail, do you have another question?
She had a third question, which we skipped over. Or if there, Gail, are you still there?
She is and she isn't.
Her hand is up. She says, I know we're out of time. Oh, nope, that's somebody else. Okay. Oh, can't read it. There is a question from somebody who wrote it, but I think we should end on Alexander's question where he said he agreed with 99% of what I said. That's a happy ending. So thank you all so much on Zoom and in the room for coming and for really helpful questions. That was very helpful for me. And to Alexander for inviting me, and Xanthippe and Thanassis for helping host and organize everything. Thank you. And to the center. There was a written question that just showed up in the chat. I didn't get to read. Oh, it was Anna. That's who it was. If it's possible, would you be able to just copy it and then you can email it to me? It is